My name is Selena. I am 54 years old. I live in a modest apartment in Evanston, Illinois, the kind of place where the walls carry old smells of boiled coffee and winter drafts. For the past 25 years, I've lived here with one purpose: raising my son, Ethan, alone. His father, David, walked out when Ethan was just 5. I still remember the way he closed the door behind him without turning back, suitcase in hand. He muttered something about not being ready for responsibility. Those words carved into me like glass. Since then, every responsibility had been mine. I became both mother and father nurse and disciplinarian, the one who comforted nightmares, and the one who dragged herself half asleep to work. By dawn, I was already rushing out the door, first to the medical center in Chicago, where I worked as an administrator from 7 home a.m. to 3 home p.m., then to Macy's until 9 home at night. On the train ride home, my reflection in the fogged window often looked like a stranger. Eyes, dull hair tied back, with no time to wash lips dry from the winter wind. I'd reach home after 10:00, the apartment eerily quiet. Ethan would already be asleep, his little chest rising and falling in the glow of his nightlight. I'd sit in the kitchen, too tired to even remove my shoes, holding a chipped mug of tea. Sometimes I whispered apologies to the silence. Apologies that he had to grow up this way, apologies that he never saw me laugh, as much as the other mothers did at PTA meetings. I stopped buying clothes for myself, cut my hair at cheap salons, counted every dollar like it was borrowed time. Every cent I had went into Ethan, his school trips, decent clothes, extra notebooks when he burned through the old ones. When Ethan told me in high school that he wanted to go to Northwestern University, I felt both pride and dread. Northwestern was expensive. I had no savings. But I promised myself no. I swore that my son would get there. So I sold my car, a silver Ford that had carried us through winters and grocery trips, because I couldn't afford tuition and car payments. From then on, I took the train every day. Standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers clutching my lunch bag, I told myself this was the price of his future. The day he received his acceptance letter from Northwestern, he ran into the apartment waving it like a trophy. His eyes were shining with hope, and in that moment, I felt that all the missed dinners, all the aching nights had been worth it. Later, when he walked across the stage at his law school graduation, I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just his victory, it was ours. Ethan grew into a man who wore sharp suits and spoke confidently in rooms full of people with power. He got a job at Baker McKenzie, one of the biggest firms in Chicago. He had a car, a high-rise apartment, and friends who admired him. And still, he came back every Sunday with groceries in his arms, saying, "Mom, one day I'll pay you back for everything you did." I always shook my head. "I don't need repayment, Ethan. Seeing you happy is enough." And I meant it. Or at least I thought I did. Because in quiet moments, a question would creep into my chest. Had I given up too much? The laughter of women my age walking out of spas, their manicured nails tapping car keys. Those lives were foreign to me. I didn't envy them, not exactly. But sometimes when the apartment walls pressed in too tightly, I wondered what it would feel like to live for myself. The truth is, I had built my identity around my son. My sacrifices were his wings. But deep inside, a darker fear lurked. What if one day someone tried to cut me away from him? What if all I had built was not enough to keep me in his life? That fear never left me, and soon it would stop being just a fear. The first time Ethan brought Madison over, I wanted to believe it was going to be the start of a new chapter 1 where my son would finally have someone who loved him the way I did. He called me on a Thursday night, excitement bubbling in his voice. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special. Her name's Madison." I spent all of Friday preparing. I made Ethan's favorite pot roast with mashed potatoes, the kind of meal that always meant comfort and home. I even polished the old silverware that hadn't been used in years. By the time the doorbell rang, the apartment smelled of thyme and garlic, warm and inviting. When I opened the door, Madison stood there in a designer dress, her high heels clicking against the worn linoleum of my hallway. She was tall, blonde, flawless, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in glossy magazines rather than in my small apartment with its faded curtains. Ethan's eyes lit up when he looked at her. His pride in introducing her to me was so obvious, it softened my suspicions. During dinner, Madison smiled brightly, complimenting the roast and asking polite questions about my work. Her laugh tinkled like glass whenever Ethan said something. But I noticed something else when Ethan turned his back to fetch water. Her smile dissolved into a blank expression, her eyes drifting over my cramped kitchen, as though she were bored, even mildly disgusted. Then, when Ethan returned, her lips curved again into the perfect smile. At first, I thought maybe I imagined it. My exhaustion had tricked me before, so I pushed the thought away and told myself not to judge. Still, little details gnawed at me. When she looked around the apartment, her gaze lingered on the scuffed walls, the peeling paint by the window. At one point, she set down her wine glass and said, "It's cozy here. Reminds me of my old college dorm." The words were wrapped in sugar, but the undertone was sharp. I laughed it off, though inside I felt like she had just pulled a thread at the seams of my dignity. Ethan, of course, didn't notice. He was too busy gazing at her like she was a miracle. The holidays came quickly after. My sister Lauren hosted Thanksgiving in her home in Chicago, and of course Madison was there. She dazzled the table with stories of her trips Paris, London, Barcelona, and about her high-profile clients at the advertising agency where she worked. She spoke like someone who had the world at her fingertips. But when I tried to share something, a memory of Ethan's childhood, or a small joke from work, Madison's responses were clipped, her attention already drifting elsewhere. After dinner, while I was helping Lauren stack dishes in the kitchen, she leaned close and whispered, "Selena, do you notice the way Madison looks at you?" I stiffened. "What do you mean?" "She's cold, not just shy, cold. Like you're an obstacle, not his mother." I wanted to argue to defend Madison for Ethan's sake. Instead, I sighed. Maybe she's nervous. Maybe she doesn't know how to fit in yet. Lauren raised an eyebrow. Or maybe she doesn't want to fit in. I didn't answer. I wanted to believe Madison's polished surface hid some warmth I hadn't seen yet. People can take time to open up. But deep inside, the same unease from that first dinner returned like a shadow at the edge of the room. Later that night, when I walked home alone in the biting November cold, I thought about the way Madison's eyes had darkened for that one unguarded second when Ethan wasn't watching. A chill crawled down my spine. It was the same look David gave me years ago, before he left detached, already gone in spirit, before he walked out the door. I shook it off and told myself not to be paranoid. But a mother's instincts rarely lie, and mine were whispering something I didn't want to hear. This woman could take my son away from me. At first, I told myself I was being too sensitive. Madison was young, ambitious, stylish. Of course, she was different from me. Ethan loved her, and wasn't that what mattered? That's what I repeated to myself like a prayer, even as the little cruelties began. The wedding planning started almost immediately after Ethan proposed. He asked me with such tenderness, "Mom, I want you to be part of it. Madison and her mom will be handling the details, but you'll help too, right?" I nodded eagerly, a spark of joy flickering inside me. But days passed, weeks. Not a single phone call from Madison. No invitation to the cake tasting, no flower arrangements to discuss no planning meetings. When I asked Ethan about it, he brushed it off with that distracted smile of his. "Mom, don't worry. Madison and her mom are on top of everything. They don't want to burden you." Burden me. That word stung. All those years of carrying 2 jobs, of scraping through winters without heat, some nights I was never too burdened for Ethan. And now suddenly, when it came to his wedding, my presence was an inconvenience. But I swallowed the bitterness. "Of course," I said softly, "as long as you're happy." Still, I tried to hold on to small traditions. For Ethan's 30th birthday, I baked the chocolate raspberry cake I had made every year since he was little. It was our cake, the recipe my mother had given me. I carried it proudly into his apartment, balanced on my tired arms. Madison opened the door. She looked at the cake, and her painted smile faltered. "Oh," she said, her voice cool. "Ethan's on keto now. He can't eat sugar." She took the cake from my hands like it was something fragile but unwanted and carried it into the kitchen. The party went on, music and laughter filling the rooms, but the cake sat untouched on the counter like a forgotten relic. No candles, no slices cut, no recognition of the years I had poured into that ritual. Ethan never even saw it. Madison hadn't told him I made it. I stood in the corner, listening to his friends toast to his success. My chest ached with a hollowness I couldn't explain. That cake sitting there like it didn't matter was more than dessert. It was proof that I was slowly being erased. Later, when Madison passed by me to grab another bottle of champagne, she leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Traditions are sweet," she murmured, her tone like honey laced with glass, "but Ethan's future needs discipline, not sentimentality." I froze the laughter of his friends muffling in my ears. I wanted to scream at her, tell her she had no right to strip away what I had built with my son. But when Ethan came over seconds later with his arm around her waist, asking if I was enjoying myself, I smiled and lied. Of course, honey. Of course. The days after blurred together, each one leaving me with a fresh cut of exclusion. Madison talked about caterers and photographers with Lauren, but never once asked for my opinion. She sent Ethan texts in front of me about travel plans and schedules, yet when I tried to join in, her eyes slid past me like I wasn't even in the room. Sometimes in the silence of my apartment at night, I replayed every interaction. Was I imagining it? Was Madison really cruel, or was I projecting my fears of being left behind again, first by David and now maybe by my own son? But then I remembered her eyes, that cold, empty flicker when Ethan wasn't looking, the same flicker I had seen in my ex-husband just before he left. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was coming, something sharp, and I was powerless to stop it. The week of the wedding arrived like a storm cloud pressing low over my chest. I told myself I was ready, that no matter how Madison treated me, I wouldn't spoil Ethan's happiness. That's what mothers do, after all. We stay silent, even when silence feels like suffocation. I had spent days working on something special for Ethan, a photo album. I went through dusty boxes in my closet, pulling out snapshots from every stage of his life. Ethan, in a homemade Halloween costume, clutching a plastic pumpkin. Ethan in his first Little League uniform. Ethan walking across the stage at Northwestern Cap, crooked, grinning, so wide I thought his face might split. Beside each picture I wrote a note, small pieces of memory, what he said that day, how I felt watching him. I wrapped the album in silver paper and tied it with a thin blue ribbon. It wasn't expensive, but it was priceless. It was the story of us. The rehearsal dinner was at a sleek downtown restaurant, a place with gold fixtures and hushed waiters that made my modest blouse feel almost shameful. I arrived early, clutching the gift. In the lobby, Madison stood with the wedding planner, radiant in a white cocktail dress. Her laughter carried like wind chimes, drawing glances from everyone around her. When she saw me, her smile widened. "Selena," she exclaimed, taking graceful steps toward me. For a moment, I felt relief. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe tonight would mend the rift. I held out the gift with trembling hands. I made something for Ethan. I thought it might mean a lot to him. Madison took it, her manicured fingers brushing the ribbon. She didn't open it. Instead, she leaned in close, so close I could feel the perfume on her skin, sharp and floral. Her smile stayed frozen, but her voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. "Starting tomorrow," she murmured, "you'll only be history for this family." The words sliced through me. She continued, her tone low and deliberate. "You've done your part. You raised Ethan, and now he's mine. From tomorrow on, you're excess baggage. Unnecessary. Better if you don't even come to the wedding. Less drama." My blood ran cold. The room spun slightly, the laughter of nearby guests muffled as if I were underwater. I stared at her perfect smile unchanged, as if she were discussing flowers or menu choices. And then she stepped back, straightened her shoulders, and said brightly, "Thank you so much, Selena. Ethan will love this." No one else saw the venom. To them, she was the glowing bride-to-be, gracious and charming. To me, she was the executioner, cutting the final string that tied me to my son's new life. I couldn't move. My gift, the album of memories, was still in her hands. She turned away, chatting with the planner as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just told me I was being erased. I walked out of that restaurant before anyone noticed I was gone. The city lights blurred around me as I stumbled to the train station, the sound of my heels against the pavement echoing louder than my thoughts. I sat in the rattling train all the way back to Evanston, staring at my reflection in the window. For the first time in years, I felt like the woman who had been left behind, worthless, replaceable. At home, I sat in the dark, staring at nothing. Madison's words replayed in my head over and over. Excess baggage. Don't come to the wedding. By dawn, my decision was made. For the first time in my life, I would not be there for my son. The morning of the wedding should have felt like a celebration. Instead, it felt like mourning. I woke early, though I had barely slept. My dress, the pale blue one I had bought at Nordstrom, more expensive than anything I'd allowed myself, in years hung on the closet door like a ghost of another life. A life where I mattered. I brewed coffee out of habit, but my hands shook so much the mug rattled against the saucer. Madison's words from the night before pulsed in my head, sharp and unrelenting. "Your excess baggage. Don't come." My phone buzzed relentlessly. First my cousin, cheerful and oblivious, asking where I was. Then my aunt. Then my sister Lauren. Each time I let the calls fade to voicemail, staring at the screen until it went dark again. I couldn't bring myself to answer. When Ethan's name finally appeared, my breath caught. His voice on the voicemail was full of joy at first, then worry, then near panic. "Mom, where are you?" "Everyone's asking. The ceremony starts soon. Please call me back. Please, Mom." Hearing him call for me broke something inside. But what could I say? That his bride had whispered me out of existence, that she had told me my years of sacrifice meant nothing now. If I told him, he might not believe me. And if he chose her over me, if my son believed her instead of me, I wouldn't survive it. So I stayed silent, around 10:30. The knock at the door came hard and urgent. Through the peephole, I saw Lauren, her hairstyled, makeup flawless, her dress pressed for the ceremony. I opened the door, shame crawling up my spine as I stood there in my pajamas. "Selena," she gasped, eyes widening. "Why aren't you dressed?" "The wedding starts in less than an hour. Ethan is losing his mind." I couldn't hold it in anymore. The words spilled out between trembling lips. I told her everything about the photo album, about Madison's whisper about being told I was no longer part of Ethan's family. Lauren's face went red with fury. She started pacing my small living room, her heels clicking against the floor. "That woman has no right. None. You are his mother. No one can take that from you." "I can't go, Lauren," I whispered, staring at the untouched blue dress on the closet door. "I can't sit in that church and watch him marry someone who despises me. I can't pretend." Lauren stopped pacing. She came to me, placed both hands on my shoulders, and looked straight into my eyes. "Then I'll tell him myself. Ethan deserves to know the truth before he makes the biggest mistake of his life." "No," I begged. "Don't cause a scene. Please don't ruin his day." Her eyes softened, but her jaw was set. "I won't cause a scene, but I won't let Madison erase you either." And with that, she left her perfume trailing in the air like a promise of battle. Minutes later, I heard the bells of St. James echo through my window. I pictured Ethan standing at the altar, waiting. Madison walking down the aisle, veil shining under stained glass. Guests turning in their pews, whispering about the empty seat where his mother should be. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my cold coffee tears, spilling silently down my face. For the first time in my life, I wasn't by my son's side. And I had no idea what would happen next. It was almost noon when my phone finally rang again. This time I answered. Lauren's voice rushed through the line, breathless, sharp with adrenaline. "Selena, there's no wedding." The words slammed into me. I gripped the edge of the table. "What do you mean, no wedding?" Ethan called it off. Everything fell apart. "You need to sit down because this is worse than we thought." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear as Lauren's story tumbled out. Just minutes before the ceremony, Robert, one of Ethan's closest friends from law school, had burst into a side room at the church. In his hands were photographs damning and undeniable. Madison wasn't the angel bride she pretended to be. She had been having an affair with her boss, Jason, the CEO, at her advertising agency. The photos were taken only 2 weeks ago at the Ritz-Carlton. In one of them, Madison was laughing in Jason's arms, wearing the Tiffany bracelet Ethan had given her for their anniversary. Robert had shoved the photos into Ethan's hands. "You need to see this before it's too late," he said. Lauren described the scene, Ethan's face draining of color, his hands trembling as he stared at the evidence. Madison was there, too, cornered. At first she denied it all, claiming the photos were fake, that Robert hated her. Then, when Ethan pressed harder, she faltered. She called it a moment of weakness. She begged for forgiveness. But before Ethan could respond, Madison's cousin, Ashley Tipsy, from Champaign, let something slip. She laughed nervously and muttered about that prenup fixing her father's bankruptcy. The room fell silent. Ethan demanded to see the prenup documents. And when he read them, the truth became clear. Madison's entire family was drowning in debt. Their fortune was gone. They had planned to use Ethan's career, his future income, to rescue themselves. Madison wasn't marrying for love. She was marrying for survival. Lauren's voice shook as she recounted what happened next. Ethan walked out of the side room and back into the church. 200 guests were waiting. He stood at the altar, still in his tuxedo, but pale as marble. His voice echoed through the sanctuary. "There will be no wedding today. Madison has betrayed me." Gasps spread like wildfire. People turned whispering, some clutching their pearls, others craning to see. Madison's father jumped up from his pew, red-faced, threatening lawsuits. Madison's mother shrieked that Ethan was humiliating their family. And Madison herself, her mask finally cracking, screamed at Ethan, calling him weak, calling him a coward. Lauren said the chaos was indescribable. Guests shouting, some storming out, others staying rooted to witness the scandal unfold. Madison, cornered, spat out one last venomous line: "Everyone cheats. You're a fool if you think love is different." And then Ethan walked away. He didn't look back. When Lauren finished, I sat frozen in my kitchen phone, pressed to my ear, heart pounding. My son, my Ethan, stood before the world and shattered his own wedding because the truth had finally clawed its way out. And yet I couldn't stop thinking while all of this unfolded, I had been sitting here in the dark believing Madison's lie that I no longer belonged. I had missed the moment he needed me most. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard the knock. Not polite, not hesitant, desperate. When I opened the door, Ethan stood there in his tuxedo. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled, his eyes swollen red. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, not the polished lawyer he had become. Without a word, he pulled me into his arms. We stood in the doorway, clinging to each other. His chest shook against mine as he broke down his tears, wetting my shoulder. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracked. "Did you know? Did you know what she was doing?" I shook my head quickly, pulling back to look at him. "No, Ethan, I swear. I knew she was unkind to me, yes, but I didn't know about the affair. I didn't know about the money." He closed his eyes, pain twisting his face. Then, quieter, he asked the question that terrified me. "Why weren't you there today? Why wasn't my mom sitting in the front row?" The shame burned hot in my chest. I swallowed hard. "Because Madison told me not to come." His eyes snapped open, disbelief flashing. "What?" I told him everything. About the rehearsal dinner, about the gift I'd made him, about Madison's whisper that I was excess baggage, that starting tomorrow I would only be history. His face went pale as I spoke. "That's why she told everyone you were sick," Ethan said slowly. "She told the guests this morning that you had called her saying you had the flu. She looked so concerned. Everyone believed her." His voice cracked again. "She didn't just cheat on me. She tried to erase you, the one person who gave me everything." I cupped his face, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Listen to me. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? You did nothing wrong." But deep inside, I hated myself. While he stood in that church, humiliated and betrayed, I had been here in my pajamas, paralyzed by fear that he might not believe me. Fear had kept me from being by his side, and now that absence was a wound neither of us could ignore. The days after were worse than I imagined. Madison crafted her own narrative. On Instagram, she posted a long letter to her thousands of followers, a heartbroken bride abandoned at the altar by a man with cold feet. She painted Ethan as a coward, me as the meddling mother who poisoned his heart with doubt. She never named me directly, but her followers didn't need names. People started staring at me in Whole Foods, their eyes sharp with judgment. Old acquaintances called to ask if I had ruined my son's wedding. Ethan felt it too. Whispers at work, sidelong glances from colleagues. One partner, at his firm, a friend of Madison's father, began dropping sly remarks in meetings. "Careful, Ethan. Don't let your personal drama cloud your legal judgment." It was like poison seeping into his career. And then came the letters. One morning I signed for a certified envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. A lawsuit. Madison's family was suing me for defamation, emotional distress, wrongful interference. They claimed I had spread lies about Madison, sabotaged her wedding, destroyed her reputation. They demanded financial compensation. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred as I called Ethan, only to hear his voice break on the other end. He had received the same letter. They were suing him too. I pressed the phone against my ear, tears streaming. "Ethan, this is all my fault. If I had gone to the wedding, if I had spoken sooner—" "No, Mom," he interrupted, firm despite the pain in his voice. "This isn't your fault. It's hers. And we're going to fight this, together." His words were strong, but I could hear the exhaustion behind them. My son had already lost his bride, his reputation, his peace. Now it seemed Madison and her family wanted to take the rest. The lawsuit letter sat on my kitchen table for days, the black ink glaring at me like an accusation. I read it over and over, the words blurring defamation, intentional sabotage, emotional damages. I could almost hear Madison's smug voice between the lines, as though she were whispering, "I told you I'd erase you." But Ethan refused to let it end that way. "We're not paying them a cent," he said, pacing my apartment in his rumpled suit, his jaw clenched. "If they think they can intimidate us, they picked the wrong family." Still, I saw the shadows under his eyes, the exhaustion dragging his shoulders. He was carrying the weight of betrayal, public humiliation, and now legal warfare. And I knew I had to help him, even if my entire body screamed with fear. My friend Clara, a paralegal at Kirkland and Ellis, came over one night to look at the documents. She spread the papers across my kitchen table, scanning them with sharp eyes. After half an hour, she looked up, lips curling in disgust. This isn't a real case. It's intimidation. They know they're bankrupt. They're hoping you'll cave. Her certainty gave me a flicker of hope, but she warned us to beat this, you'll need evidence. Proof of their motives, proof of Madison's lies. So Ethan and I dug. We searched his phone, his old emails, even boxes of paperwork I had kept out of habit. Slowly, a trail appeared. Emails between Madison and her mother discussing Ethan's financial potential. Text messages where Madison mocked Ethan for taking pro bono clients instead of lucrative corporate ones. And then the prenup itself, which Ethan had insisted on reading again. Its clauses were brutal, siphoning off nearly every asset he would ever earn into a safety net for her bankrupt family. One night, while sifting through boxes, I found a folder Ethan had tossed aside years ago. Old messages, drafts, things he hadn't thought important. Inside were screenshots Madison had once sent him, bragging about her connections with wealthy men who understood ambition. I stared at the words, bile rising in my throat. She had been rehearsing this performance long before she met him. Clara connected us with someone who could help. Michael Sanders, a journalist from the Chicago Tribune. He specialized in exposing financial fraud. When we met him in a dim cafe, he listened quietly as Ethan laid out the evidence, his pen scratching across a notebook. Michael leaned back, eyes glinting. If half of this checks out, their entire family is a house of cards. This isn't just about a broken engagement. It's about a pattern of manipulation and fraud. The next weeks crawled by as Michael investigated. He dug into the Harrison family's past, interviewing former employees of their failed startup's creditors who had never been paid even a bank clerk willing to speak anonymously. Each new finding was worse than the last. Unpaid loans, suspicious offshore accounts, and whispers of securities fraud. Meanwhile, Madison doubled down online. She posted photos of herself in white dresses, captions like healing after betrayal and when jealousy destroys love. Her followers sent hateful messages to me, calling me a monster, a bitter old woman who had ruined her son's happiness. At the grocery store, strangers whispered. I wanted to crawl into myself, vanish. But Ethan wouldn't let me. Mom, don't you see? That's what she wants. For you to doubt yourself, for you to disappear. We can't let her win. Then one cold February morning, Michael called. It's ready. The story will run tomorrow. Front page. When the paper hit the stands, the headline burned like fire. Behind the canceled wedding. The Harrison family's financial schemes exposed. The article laid everything bare. Madison's father's bankrupt ventures, the predatory prenup, former employees describing years of deceit, independent lawyers calling the contract exploitative, even photos of Madison with Jason, her affair, no longer rumor but fact. The shift was immediate. Public opinion swung like a pendulum. At Whole Foods, the same neighbors who once glared now muttered apologies. Online, Madison's carefully curated image crumbled. Her followers turned on her comments, filling with words like fraud, liar, gold digger. For the first time in months, I exhaled, without feeling like the world was pressing against my lungs. But I also knew this war wasn't over. People like Madison didn't surrender easily. 2 weeks after the article came out, Madison's lawyers reached out with an offer. They wanted everything buried, drop the lawsuits, erase the story, sign an NDA that would silence us forever. Clara read the offer aloud, then looked at us with disbelief. They're scared. Don't you see? You don't negotiate from strength when you've already won. Ethan and I sat at my kitchen table, the same place where the lawsuit letter had once felt like a death sentence. I studied my son's face. He was worn, yes, but stronger too, like iron hardened by fire. No deals, he said firmly. We did nothing wrong. We won't let them buy silence. And so we refused. The case unraveled quickly after that. A judge dismissed Madison's claims for lack of evidence. The detective who had quietly tried to intimidate Ethan turned out to have financial ties to Madison's father and was reassigned. With their reputation shredded and debts closing in the Harrison family, left Chicago in shame, vanishing to California. Madison's Instagram went dark not long after. But life didn't snap back to normal. It shifted. For months, I lived in the quiet aftermath, relearning how to breathe. I started taking painting classes at a studio in Ravenswood. I hadn't touched a brush in decades, but when color spread across canvas beneath my hand, I felt something open inside me. I wasn't just Ethan's mother, or Madison's enemy, or a victim of betrayal. I was Selena, a woman who still had pieces of herself left to uncover. I joined a support group at the Women's Center where women sat in a circle sharing stories of being diminished, discarded, erased. For the first time, I spoke mine aloud. My voice trembled at first, but the nods of understanding around me steadied it. Dr. Martinez, the psychologist leading the group, smiled gently. Selena, your story doesn't end with being cast aside. It begins again with you choosing yourself. She asked me later to mentor other women. At first, I laughed it off, me a mentor. But 6 months after the wedding, that wasn't. I found myself standing in front of a small room at Northwestern Memorial telling my story. I spoke about sacrifice, about boundaries, about how love shouldn't mean erasure. Some women cried. Some came up after to say thank you. For the first time, I realized my pain had become someone else's lantern. Ethan's path shifted too. He left Baker McKenzie, where the whispers never really stopped, and opened his own practice in the Loop. His focus, financial fraud victims. If I can stop one more family from being used, the way Madison used me, he told me, then it's worth it. Clients came quickly. Word spread that he was relentless in court, but kind in person. And then came Olivia. He brought her to Sunday dinner one evening, nervous in a way I hadn't seen in years. She was nothing like Madison. No designer armor, no practiced smile. She was an environmental lawyer, earnest and thoughtful. She asked me about my paintings, listened to my rambling stories about color and texture as if they mattered. When Ethan laughed at her jokes, it was genuine, not desperate. Later, when she left, Ethan leaned close. I see the difference now, Mom. I finally understand what real feels like. Months turned into a year. My paintings were chosen for a group exhibition at the Chicago Cultural Center. I enrolled in counseling courses at Loyola University, my notebooks filling with ideas. I never thought I'd have the courage to write. One evening, the Women's Foundation invited me to speak at their annual gala. I stood on stage, the lights blinding, my heart pounding. I told them about Ethan, about Madison, about the whisper at the rehearsal dinner that almost broke me. And then I told them about resilience, about finding myself at 54 years old, about learning that strength isn't silent sacrifice, it's refusing to let anyone decide you are excess baggage. When I stepped off the stage, applause still echoing, I realized something. This wasn't the life I planned, but it was mine, and for the first time I was living it fully, not just for Ethan, but for me. I had been cast aside, and I had built a new beginning from the rubble. Not history, not baggage, just Selena.